My name is Harold, and I'm 67 years old. Last month, my daughter Beatrice told me something that cut deeper than any wound I've ever felt. She said, "Dad, you're too old to fly with us. Just take care of the house while we're in Hawaii." Those words from the little girl I raised, alone the one I worked 2 jobs to put through law school, hit me like a freight train. I thought I knew what betrayal felt like when my wife passed away 15 years ago, but this was different. This came from the person I loved most in the world. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe because trust me, you'll want to hear how this story unfolds. What my daughter and her family discovered when they returned from that trip will shock you just as much as it shocked them. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand how we got to this point. I've lived in Chicago my entire life, working construction for 45 years. My hands are weathered, my back aches most mornings. But I'm proud of every callus and every scar because they represent the life I built for my family. When my wife Sarah died of cancer, when Beatrice was just 12 years old, I made a promise at her funeral that our daughter would never want for anything. Those were the hardest years of my life. I'd wake up at 4:30 in the morning to get to the job site by 6, work until 3, then rush home to make sure Beatrice had lunch money and help with her homework. Most evenings I'd head to my second job doing maintenance at the local community college. I'd get home around 11, exhausted, but knowing every dollar was going toward Beatrice's future. I remember teaching her to ride a bike in our tiny backyard, running alongside her until my lungs burned because I refused to let her fall. I attended every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every graduation ceremony. When she got accepted to Northwestern Law School, I cried harder than I did at Sarah's funeral. These were tears of joy, of pride, of knowing that my little girl was going to have opportunities I never dreamed of. Beatrice graduated summa cum laude and landed a job at a prestigious law firm downtown. That's where she met Marcus, another lawyer from a wealthy family. Their wedding was beautiful, held at the Chicago Yacht Club with 300 guests. I wore my only suit, the same one I'd worn to Sarah's funeral, but I didn't care. My daughter was marrying a good man who could provide for her in ways I never could. When Emma was born 2 years later, followed by Jake 14 months after that, I thought my heart might burst with happiness. I was finally a grandfather. Those kids became the light of my life. I'd babysit every weekend, teaching Emma to fish at Navy Pier and showing Jake how to throw a curveball in Grant Park. They called me Grandpa Harold, and hearing those words made every sacrifice worthwhile. But something started to change after Marcus got promoted to partner. They moved to a mansion in Lincoln Park, started taking expensive vacations, joined the country club. The phone calls became less frequent, the visits shorter. Beatrice would sound distracted when we talked, always mentioning some charity gala or business dinner they had to attend. I told myself it was natural. They were busy building their life, and I was proud of their success. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was becoming an inconvenience. When I'd suggest meeting for dinner, Beatrice would say they were too busy. When I offered to take the kids to a Cubs game, she'd mention they already had plans at the club. Little by little, I felt myself being pushed to the margins of their lives, but I accepted it because I thought that's what love meant. Putting their happiness before my own feelings. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was having my usual breakfast of oatmeal and coffee when the phone rang. Beatrice's voice sounded bright and excited, more animated than I'd heard her in months. "Dad, I have amazing news. Marcus surprised us with a family vacation to Hawaii. 2 weeks at the Grand Wailea Resort in Maui. The kids are absolutely thrilled." My heart jumped with excitement. A family vacation sounded wonderful. I immediately started thinking about how long it had been since we'd all spent quality time together. Maybe this was exactly what we needed to reconnect. That sounds incredible, honey. When are you thinking of going? I should probably start looking at flights soon. And don't worry about the cost, I've got plenty saved up to cover my share. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Beatrice spoke again, her voice had changed completely. It was colder, more formal, like she was talking to a client rather than her father. Oh, Dad, I think you misunderstood. This is just for our immediate family. Marcus has planned all these activities, snorkeling, hiking, adventure tours. You're too old to fly with us, and honestly, you'd just slow us down. It would be better if you just took care of the house while we're gone. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually had to sit down because my legs felt weak. Too old to fly, I was 67, not 97. I was in decent health, walked 3 miles every morning, and had traveled plenty in my younger years. Beatrice, I don't understand. I'm perfectly capable of flying. I was in Hawaii with your mother for our 20th anniversary. I can keep up with whatever you have planned. Dad, please don't make this difficult. Marcus has already booked everything, and it's designed for younger people. The snorkeling requires diving certification. The hiking trails are pretty challenging, and we'll be staying out late at the resort bars. You'd be much more comfortable staying home. Besides, someone needs to watch the house, water the plants, that sort of thing. I wanted to argue, to point out that I'd been diving in Lake Michigan, that I'd hiked the Appalachian Trail with friends just 2 years ago. But something in her tone told me this wasn't really about my physical capabilities. This was about something deeper, something I wasn't ready to confront. I see, was all I managed to say. Great, I knew you'd understand. We leave next Friday and come back the following Sunday. I'll text you the house key code and a list of things that need to be done. Thanks, Dad. You're the best. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding the phone for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My own daughter had essentially told me I was too old and too much of a burden to join a family vacation. The worst part was how casually she'd said it, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation, wondering if I'd somehow misheard or misunderstood. But no matter how many times I went over it, the message was clear. I wasn't welcome on their family vacation because I was old and would slow them down. The days leading up to their departure were torture. I went through the motions of preparing the house, buying groceries they'd requested, even purchasing gifts for Emma and Jake to find when they returned. But inside I felt hollow, like something essential had been carved out of me. The Friday morning they left for Hawaii, I stood at my kitchen window watching Marcus load their expensive luggage into his BMW SUV. Emma and Jake looked excited, chattering about snorkeling and surfing lessons. Beatrice was checking something on her phone, looking every inch the successful lawyer in her designer travel outfit. None of them came to say goodbye in person. For the first few days, I tried to stay busy. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, organized my workshop in the basement, even started reading a book I'd been meaning to get to for months. But the silence was overwhelming. I'd grown used to my quiet routines, but this felt different. This was the silence of being deliberately excluded, of being deemed unworthy of my own family's time. On the 4th day, something happened that changed everything. I was sitting in my recliner, half watching a Cubs game on television, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Emma's name, and my heart lifted for the first time in days. Grandpa Harold, how are you? Emma, sweetheart, I'm fine. How's Hawaii? Are you having a wonderful time? Oh my gosh, Grandpa, it's incredible. We went snorkeling yesterday and I saw sea turtles. And tonight we're going to this amazing restaurant that overlooks the ocean. Mom and Dad are getting dressed up for some fancy dinner. We chatted for a few more minutes about her adventures, and I felt genuinely happy hearing the joy in her voice. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Grandpa, I'm so sorry you couldn't come with us. I asked Mom why you weren't here, and she said it was because you couldn't afford it, and it would be embarrassing if people knew we couldn't pay for everyone." The phone slipped in my hand. I had to catch it before it fell to the floor. She said, "What, honey?" "Well, she said that Dad Marcus paid for everything because our family has more money now, and it would look weird if you came but couldn't pay your share. She said it was better this way, so no one would be uncomfortable." My vision blurred with anger. Emma kept talking, but I could barely hear her over the roar of blood in my ears. After we hung up, I sat there trembling with rage and hurt. Not only had Beatrice excluded me from their vacation, but she'd lied about the reason. She'd made it sound like I was some charity case who couldn't afford to travel with them. I walked to my desk and pulled out my latest bank statement. 43 years of careful saving of living modestly and investing wisely had left me with $80,000 in savings accounts and CDs. My house was paid off, worth at least $400,000 in today's market. I could have easily afforded not just my portion of their Hawaii trip, but probably the entire family's expenses. But that wasn't the real issue. The real issue was that my daughter was ashamed of me. She saw me as some embarrassing old man who would lower the tone of their sophisticated vacation. The man who had sacrificed everything to give her the education and opportunities that led to her current success was now an inconvenience to be hidden away. I spent the rest of the evening researching their resort online. The Grand Wailea was indeed expensive, but a quick calculation showed their total costs were probably around $15,000. Money I absolutely could have contributed without touching my core savings. Money I would have been happy to spend for the chance to watch my grandchildren experience Hawaii for the first time. That night, something fundamental shifted inside me. For 15 years since Sarah's death, I'd defined myself primarily as Beatrice's father and the kids' grandfather. I'd been content to live quietly, to be available whenever they needed me, to find my joy in their happiness. But now I realized they didn't actually need me or even particularly want me around. I was just a convenient babysitter and house watcher. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I was done accepting scraps of attention from my own family. I was done pretending that being excluded and patronized was normal. I was 67 years old, in good health, with financial security, and decades of life ahead of me. It was time to start living for Harold, instead of just existing in the shadows of other people's lives. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, I decided to take action. But I wasn't going to confront Beatrice directly or have some dramatic showdown. That wasn't my style. And besides, I'd learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words. My first step was to call James Morrison, the lawyer who'd helped me with estate planning a few years back. We'd gone to high school together, and he'd always been straight with me about financial matters. "Harold, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "Jim, I need to understand something about my will and my assets. If I wanted to make some changes, what would be involved?" We talked for over an hour. Jim walked me through the current structure of my will, which left everything to Beatrice with provisions for Emma and Jake's education. He explained how easy it would be to modify or even completely restructure my bequests. By the end of the conversation, I had a much clearer picture of my financial position and my options. The numbers were even better than I'd thought. My house had appreciated significantly, my savings had grown steadily, and I had a decent pension from my union job, plus Social Security. I wasn't wealthy by Marcus and Beatrice's standards, but I was certainly comfortable enough to live well and pursue interests I'd been putting off for years. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I went shopping for myself. Not necessities, not things for the house, but things I wanted. I bought a new camera, something I'd been interested in since high school, but never felt I could justify. I purchased some books on photography and travel. I even bought myself some new clothes that actually fit properly, instead of the worn-out work clothes I'd been living in. The next day, I signed up for a computer class at the community college. I'd been getting by with basic email and occasional internet browsing, but I realized how much I was missing. The instructor, a patient woman named Carol, helped me set up social media accounts and showed me how to research travel destinations online. Within a week, I'd discovered a whole world I'd been ignoring. There were travel groups for seniors, photography clubs, volunteer organizations doing meaningful work around the city. I started reaching out, attending meetings, introducing myself to people who shared my interests. The most significant encounter happened at a photography workshop in Lincoln Park. I was struggling with the camera settings when a woman nearby offered to help. Her name was Dolores, she was 63, and she'd been widowed for 5 years. Like me, she'd spent years taking care of everyone else and was just now starting to rediscover her own interests. The trick, she said, adjusting my camera, is to remember that it's never too late to start a new chapter. We spent the rest of the afternoon walking around the park, taking pictures and talking. Dolores had raised 3 children as a single mother after her husband died in an industrial accident. Her kids were grown and lived in other states, visiting maybe twice a year. She'd decided that instead of waiting for them to include her in their lives, she was going to create a life worth living on her own terms. I wasted too many years waiting for permission to be happy, she told me as we sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Now I give myself permission. Her words resonated with me in a way I hadn't expected. I'd been waiting for Beatrice to invite me into her life to validate my worth as a father and grandfather. But what if I stopped waiting? What if I started building a life that didn't depend on their approval or inclusion? Over the next few weeks, Dolores and I became close friends. We attended photography classes together, explored different neighborhoods in Chicago, and talked for hours about our dreams and regrets. She introduced me to her circle of friends, active seniors who traveled, volunteered, and pursued hobbies with enthusiasm I envied. Through them, I learned about a European river cruise designed for people our age. 14 days visiting Amsterdam, Germany, France, and Switzerland. The cost was significant, but well within my budget, especially if I had a travel companion to share expenses. "We should do it," Dolores said when I mentioned the cruise. "Life's too short to keep waiting for someday." I looked at the brochure, imagining myself walking through European cities, taking photographs, experiencing cultures I'd only read about. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about the future. "You're right," I said. "Let's book it." Beatrice and her family returned from Hawaii on a Sunday evening. I knew because Emma had texted me pictures throughout their trip. Beautiful sunset photos, images of tropical fish from their snorkeling adventures, family shots at expensive restaurants. In every picture, they looked happy and relaxed. Not once did anyone mention missing me or wishing I'd been there. Monday morning, Beatrice called to check in. Her tone was cheerful but perfunctory, like she was checking an item off her to-do list. "Hi, Dad, we're back. Hawaii was absolutely incredible. The kids had such a great time and Marcus and I really needed the break. How did everything go at home?" "Everything went fine," I replied calmly. "The house is in good shape, plants are watered, mail is sorted on the kitchen counter." "Perfect, you're such a lifesaver. I don't know what we'd do without you." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. They seemed to do just fine without me for 2 weeks in paradise. "Beatrice, I have some news to share," I've booked a trip to Europe. I'll be gone for 6 weeks starting next month. There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice had a sharp edge I recognized from her childhood when she didn't get her way. Dad, what are you talking about Europe? You can't just go to Europe by yourself. Actually, I can, and I am. I'm going with a friend, a woman named Dolores. We're doing a river cruise and then spending additional time in Paris and Rome. A woman, Dad, you barely know anyone outside of our family. Who is this person? Is she after your money? I felt a flash of anger at her tone. Even now, she couldn't imagine that someone might genuinely enjoy my company. Dolores is a lovely person I met at a photography class. She's a retired teacher, a grandmother, and someone who actually values spending time with me. We share common interests and enjoy each other's company. Photography class. Dad, when did you start taking photography classes, and why didn't you tell me about this woman before? There are quite a few things about my life that I haven't shared with you, Beatrice. Just like there are apparently many things about your life and your feelings that you haven't shared with me. Another long pause. I could practically hear her mind working, trying to figure out what was happening and how to regain control of the conversation. Look, Dad, I think we need to sit down and talk about this properly. You can't just make major life decisions without discussing them with family. What if something happens to you in Europe? What if this woman isn't who she says she is? You're being reckless. I'm being reckless. I laughed, genuinely amused by her concern. Beatrice, I'm 67 years old, not 97. I'm in good health. I have travel insurance and I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. After all, you made it very clear that I'm too old to slow down your family, but apparently I'm just the right age for independent adventures. The silence that followed was deafening. I could tell she was remembering her exact words about me being too old to travel with them. Dad, that's not what I meant, and you know it. Is it not? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you think I'm simultaneously too old to join your family vacation, but also too irresponsible to make my own travel plans. Which is it, Beatrice? We need to talk about this in person. Can you come over for dinner tomorrow night? I'm sorry, but I already have plans. Dolores and I are attending a travel planning seminar, and then we're having dinner with some friends from our photography group. Perhaps we can schedule something for next week. I could hear her intake of breath. In all the years since Sarah died, I'd never turned down a family dinner invitation. Dad, what's gotten into you? You're acting like a completely different person. Maybe I am, Beatrice. Maybe it's time I started acting like Harold instead of just your convenient father. After I hung up, I felt surprisingly calm. For the first time in our relationship, I'd set a boundary and stuck to it. Instead of dropping everything to accommodate her schedule, I'd prioritized my own plans. It felt strange but liberating. That evening, Dolores and I did indeed attend the travel seminar, and we had dinner afterward with 3 other couples from our photography group. The conversation was lively and interesting, covering everything from European art history to the best techniques for travel photography. People asked my opinions, laughed at my stories, and treated me like someone worth knowing. It was a revelation. The next few days brought a series of increasingly frantic phone calls from Beatrice. She'd clearly been doing some investigating and had discovered more about my recent activities than I'd shared. She'd also apparently driven by my house and noticed the for sale sign I'd had installed. Dad, are you selling the house without even discussing it with me? I'm downsizing, Beatrice. I don't need a 4-bedroom house for just myself. I've found a nice 2-bedroom condo in a 55-plus community with amenities I'll actually use. It has a photography darkroom, a woodworking shop, and organized activities for people my age. But that house is my childhood home. You can't just sell it. It's been 15 years since you lived here, and you visit maybe once every few months. I understand it has sentimental value, but I need to think practically about my future. The equity from this house will give me financial freedom to travel and pursue interests I've been putting off. What about Emma and Jake? They love coming to Grandpa's house. This was perhaps the cruelest thing she could have said, because we both knew it wasn't true. The kids rarely visited, and when they did, they seemed bored and eager to leave. Beatrice, Emma, and Jake are wonderful children, but they're teenagers now with their own interests. They don't need a big old house to occasionally visit. They need a grandfather who's engaged with life, who has stories to tell and experiences to share. That's what I'm working toward. I don't understand what's happened to you. Ever since we got back from Hawaii, you've been acting strange. Are you having some kind of breakdown? I almost laughed. A breakdown? I was finally having a breakthrough. No, Beatrice, I'm not having a breakdown. I'm having a realization. For 15 years, I've organized my entire life around being available for you and the kids whenever you needed me. I've been the reliable babysitter, the house watcher, the emergency contact. But I've realized that being needed occasionally isn't the same as being valued consistently. Of course we value you, Dad. Your family. Am I? Because when you planned a family vacation, I wasn't included in your definition of family. When you talk about your lives and your future, I'm not part of those conversations. I'm more like a helpful neighbor who happens to share your DNA. The conversation went on for another 20 minutes, with Beatrice alternating between pleading, arguing, and trying to guilt me into changing my mind. But I'd made my decision. I was going to Europe, I was selling the house, and I was creating a life that didn't depend on their approval or inclusion. That weekend, Marcus called me for the first time in months. His approach was more diplomatic than his wife's, but the message was essentially the same. Harold, Beatrice is very concerned about these sudden changes you're making. From an outside perspective, I have to agree that it seems impulsive. Maybe we should sit down with a financial advisor and make sure you're making sound decisions. Marcus, I appreciate your concern, but my finances are in excellent shape. I've been managing money successfully for 43 years, and I don't need supervision now. Besides, isn't it interesting that no one questioned my decision-making ability when I was quietly sitting at home available whenever you needed me? That's not fair, Harold. We've always appreciated everything you do for the family. Have you? Because when I offered to contribute to your Hawaii vacation, I was told I was too old to participate. When I make my own travel plans, I'm told I'm being reckless. It seems like I'm either too old or too irresponsible, depending on what's convenient for your family. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Unlike his wife, he seemed to be actually processing what I was saying. Harold, I think there may have been some miscommunication about the Hawaii trip. Beatrice was trying to protect your feelings, not exclude you maliciously. Protect my feelings by lying about the reasons, by telling Emma that I couldn't afford to go. And it would be embarrassing, Marcus. I have $80,000 in savings and a paid-off house worth $400,000. I could have funded your entire vacation without touching my retirement accounts. Another long silence. I didn't know that, he said quietly. Of course you didn't. Because no one in this family has bothered to have an actual conversation with me about my life, my interests, or my capabilities in years. You've all just assumed I'm some doddering old man waiting around for scraps of attention. The conversation ended more cordially than my talks with Beatrice, but I could tell Marcus was finally beginning to understand the real issues at play. That evening, Emma called me, tears in her voice. Grandpa Harold, Mom says you're moving away, and we won't get to see you anymore. Is that true? My heart broke a little because Emma was the innocent victim in all of this adult dysfunction. Sweetheart, I'm not moving far away. I'm moving to a condo about 20 minutes from where you live. The difference is that I'm also going to start traveling and having adventures instead of just sitting at home waiting for visits. When you do come see me, I'll have new photos to show you and stories to tell you about the places I've been. But why, Grandpa, aren't you happy with us? How do you explain to a 16-year-old that love without respect isn't enough, that being wanted only when convenient isn't the same as being valued? Emma, I love you and Jake more than anything in the world. But I've realized that I can't live my whole life just waiting for other people to include me. I need to create my own happiness and my own adventures. That doesn't mean I love you less. It means I'm learning to love myself too. We talked for another half hour, and by the end of the conversation, Emma actually sounded excited about hearing stories from my European trip. She even asked if I could bring her back something special from Paris. Of course I will, sweetheart. And maybe when you're a little older, you can come visit me in Europe sometime. Really? You'd want me to come with you? Emma, I would love nothing more than to share those experiences with you. But only if it's something you genuinely want to do, not because someone thinks you should spend time with your old grandfather. After we hung up, I felt better than I had since this whole situation began. Emma's genuine enthusiasm reminded me what family relationships could be when they were based on mutual interest rather than obligation. 2 weeks before my scheduled departure for Europe, Beatrice showed up at my house unannounced. I was in my workshop carefully packing my photography equipment for the trip when I heard her key in the front door lock. Dad, where are you? I found her standing in my living room looking around like she'd never seen the place before, which in a way she hadn't. The house looked different now that I'd started preparing for the move. Family photos were packed away, furniture had been rearranged, and travel brochures were spread across the coffee table. Hello, Beatrice. This is a surprise. She looked tired and older than her 42 years. For the first time, I noticed lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Dad, we need to talk. Really talk without all the arguing and defensiveness. I gestured to the couch and we both sat down. The silence stretched between us for several minutes before she spoke again. I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. This was not what I'd expected. In all our recent conversations, Beatrice had been defensive and argumentative. This was the first time she'd acknowledged that she might have done something wrong. I'm listening, I said simply. The Hawaii trip. You were right to be hurt, and I was wrong to exclude you. But it wasn't really about your age, Dad. It was about... She paused, struggling with the words. It was about Marcus's friends and colleagues who were going to be there. I was worried that you wouldn't fit in with their lifestyle, and I was ashamed of myself for caring about that. At least she was being honest now. I see. No, you don't see, not completely. Marcus's promotion came with certain social expectations. We're expected to maintain a certain image, to socialize with certain people, to present ourselves in specific ways. It's shallow and horrible, and I hate that I got caught up in it, but I did. So you were embarrassed by me. Not embarrassed by you as a person, Dad. Embarrassed by the difference between our lifestyles. These people vacation in Hawaii regularly, spend thousands of dollars on dinner, buy clothes that cost more than most people's car payments. I was afraid they'd see you as someone who didn't belong in that world. Her honesty was painful but necessary. Beatrice, do you remember when you were 8 years old and you wanted to invite the whole class to your birthday party? She looked confused by the change of subject. Vaguely. I told you we could only afford to invite 6 kids, and you cried because you were afraid the other children would think less of you if they weren't invited. Do you remember what I told you then? No. I told you that anyone who would judge you based on how much money your father made wasn't worth worrying about. I told you that real friends would care about your character, not your circumstances. She was quiet, processing the parallel I was drawing. The difference is I was 8 years old then. Yes, you were. But apparently some lessons need to be relearned. We sat in silence for a few more minutes. When Beatrice spoke again, her voice was small and ashamed. I've become someone I don't recognize, Dad. Somewhere along the way, I started valuing the wrong things. Marcus's success is real, and I'm proud of what he's accomplished, but I let it change how I see everything else, including you. Including yourself, I added gently. She nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. I used to be proud of where I came from. Proud that my father worked construction to put me through law school. Proud that we made something from nothing, through hard work and sacrifice. But Marcus's world made me feel like that background was something to hide rather than celebrate. And what do you think now? Now I think I've been an ungrateful fool who nearly destroyed the most important relationship in my life because I was worried about what some shallow people might think. I reached over and took her hand. It was the first time we'd had any physical contact in months. Beatrice, I don't want you to hate yourself or your success. I want you to be proud of what you've accomplished. But I also need you to understand that excluding me from your life doesn't protect me from anything. It just makes me feel like I don't matter to you anymore. You do matter, Dad. You matter more than anything. I just lost sight of that for a while. So what happens now? I asked. Now I hope you'll give me a chance to do better. I know I can't undo the hurt I've caused, and I know I need to earn back your trust. But I'd like to try if you'll let me. I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus manipulation. What I saw was my little girl, the one I'd raised to be strong and independent, finally being honest about her mistakes. I'm still going to Europe, Beatrice. I'm still selling the house and moving to the condo. Those decisions aren't about punishing you. They're about building a life I can be proud of. I understand. And I think you should go. I think you should have adventures and take pictures and do all the things you've been putting off. I just hope that when you come back, there will be room in that new life for your family. There will always be room for family, Beatrice. Real family. The kind that includes each other, not out of obligation, but because we genuinely enjoy being together. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Can we start over, Dad? Not pretend the past didn't happen, but start building something better from here? I'd like that, I said. But it's going to require changes from everyone, not just apologies. What kind of changes? Real inclusion in family decisions. Honest communication about feelings and expectations. And recognition that I'm not just your father and the kid's grandfather. I'm Harold, a person with my own interests and dreams and opinions that matter. Deal, she said immediately. And Dad, when you get back from Europe, maybe you could teach me photography. I'd like to learn something new, and I'd like to learn it from you. For the first time in months, I smiled at my daughter with genuine warmth. I'd love that, Beatrice. I'd love that very much. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new condo, sorting through hundreds of photographs from my European adventure with Dolores. The river cruise was everything we'd hoped for, and more. We explored castles along the Rhine, ate incredible food in French bistros, and wandered through art museums in Amsterdam. In Paris, we spent 3 days just walking and taking pictures, talking to locals and other travelers, feeling like citizens of the world rather than just tourists. The best part wasn't the destinations, though. It was the feeling of being fully alive and engaged with life again. For too many years, I'd been living in the margins, defining myself through other people's needs and schedules. In Europe, I remembered what it felt like to wake up excited about the day ahead, to have conversations with strangers, to challenge myself with new experiences. Dolores and I have decided to move in together. Not because we need taking care of, but because we enjoy each other's company and want to share our adventures. She's moving into the second bedroom of my condo next month, and we're already planning our next trip to Italy in the spring. The relationship with Beatrice has improved dramatically. She calls regularly now, and not just when she needs something. She asks about my photography, my travel plans, my life with Dolores. More importantly, she includes me in family decisions and actually listens to my opinions. Last month, they planned a family vacation to Colorado, and this time the invitation was genuine. Marcus personally called to ask if I'd like to join them for a week of hiking and sightseeing in the Rockies. The difference was immediately apparent. Instead of being treated like an elderly burden who might slow them down, I was included as an equal participant in planning activities. The vacation was wonderful. I kept up with everyone on the hiking trails, contributed to conversations around the dinner table, and even taught Emma some photography techniques that impressed her friends back home. Jake and I discovered a shared interest in geology, spending hours collecting interesting rocks and talking about how the mountains were formed. But perhaps the most significant change has been in how Beatrice sees me. She no longer talks down to me or makes assumptions about my capabilities. When I mention something I'm interested in trying, and she encourages me instead of finding reasons why it might not be appropriate for someone my age. Last week, she asked for my advice about a career decision she's facing. Not perfunctory consultation, but genuine interest in my perspective. We talked for 2 hours about the pros and cons of her options, and she ultimately made her choice based partly on insights I shared from my own work experience. I've also become something of a financial advisor to the family. Once they realized the extent of my savings and investments, Marcus started asking my opinion about retirement planning and long-term financial strategies. It's satisfying to be recognized for knowledge and experience rather than just tolerated as an aging relative. The kids are different too. Emma has asked if she can come with Dolores and me to Italy in the spring. Not because her parents think she should spend time with her grandfather, but because she's genuinely excited about the travel and photography opportunities. Jake has started calling me regularly to talk about his classes and ask advice about high school decisions. These conversations feel natural and unforced, the way family relationships should be. I think the key lesson in all of this is about the difference between being needed and being valued. For years, I thought that being available whenever my family needed something was the same as being an important part of their lives. But availability without respect isn't love, it's just convenience. When I stopped making myself constantly available and started building my own interesting life, something unexpected happened. Instead of pushing my family away, it drew them closer. They became interested in my experiences, curious about my perspectives, and respectful of my independence. I've learned that sometimes the best way to be included is to prove you don't need to be included. When you're not desperately waiting for scraps of attention, people start offering genuine interest. When you're not defining yourself entirely through your relationships with others, those relationships become healthier and more balanced. Dolores often says that we taught our children how to treat us by what we were willing to accept. For too many years, I accepted being marginalized because I was afraid that demanding more might result in getting nothing at all. But the truth is, I was already getting nothing that mattered. Polite tolerance isn't love, and obligation isn't affection. Now at 68, I feel more alive and optimistic than I have in decades. I have a partner who enjoys my company, a family that respects my independence, and a calendar full of adventures I'm excited to experience. I take photographs that make me proud, engage in conversations that challenge my thinking, and wake up each morning with plans that interest me. Age, I've discovered, really is just a number. Dignity, however, is timeless. When you insist on being treated with dignity, people either rise to meet that standard or they reveal themselves as not worth your time and energy. Either way, you win. My story could have ended with a lonely old man sitting in an empty house bitter about being excluded and forgotten. Instead, it's become a story about rediscovering yourself, setting boundaries, and creating the life you actually want, rather than just accepting the life others think you should have. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the confrontation with Beatrice, if I wish I'd handled things differently. The answer is absolutely not. That painful period of honesty and boundary setting was necessary for both of us. She needed to confront her own values and priorities, and I needed to stop accepting treatment that diminished my worth as a person. The man who was told he was too old to travel with his family just returned from a month in Europe and is planning trips to Italy, Ireland, and maybe even Australia. The man who was treated like an inconvenience is now sought out for advice and included as an equal in family discussions. The man who felt invisible has become someone people genuinely enjoy spending time with. That transformation didn't happen because I became a different person. It happened because I finally started insisting on being treated like the person I'd always been, someone with value, dignity, and contributions to make to the people I love. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself in my story, whether you're the adult child who's been taking a parent for granted, or the parent who's been accepting less than you deserve, I encourage you to have those difficult conversations. Don't let resentment build until it explodes. Don't assume that family means never having to ask for respect. What aspects of my story resonated most with you? Have you ever felt excluded from your own family's life, or have you inadvertently made someone else feel that way? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please hit that like button if this story touched you, and subscribe for more real stories about family dignity and finding your way back to the life you actually want to live. Share this video with someone who might need to hear this message. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, it's never too late to start living the life you deserve. May your own journey be filled with respect, adventure, and the kind of love that lifts you up rather than holds you back.